Welcome to HiNZ 2018, and I'm here today with Richard Corbridge. Richard is the CDIO, Chief Digital and Information Officer from the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust. Richard gave a keynote yesterday, which was just fascinating, on digital transformation and changes in his delivery team at Leeds, and they've achieved an amazing amount from what we heard yesterday. So I'd like to talk about some of those highlights, Richard. One of the first, or if not the first thing that you mentioned, you gave a quote at the beginning of your talk yesterday, and you said, "We are witnessing the collapse of expertise and the beginning of collaborative sense-making." And you showed a photo of a bunch of very old gentlemen sitting around a table. And perhaps you can just expand on what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 5 years and in a more rapid space in the last 12 months is a movement away from the experts leading IT in healthcare. So a movement away from IT people leading in healthcare and a movement towards a clinical focus. So a collaboration between clinicians, patients, and then moving to a collaboration between the different types of clinicians. You know, for too long, IT was for doctors and not for nurses and not for AHPs and not for the system. In Leeds and across the NHS and slowly across the rest of the world, we've started to see IT move to this concept of being a digital function for all the different types of the way care is delivered. So for me, this concept of collaborative sense-making from David Halsmer, it's become a bit of a mantra of how do we come together to make sense of the problems so that we can answer with a digital solution. One of my chief clinical information officers in Leeds is fond of saying, please stop coming to me with solutions. Come to me with your problem and let us work together on what the solution is. And that's very much this collaboration. But another part of that collaboration fits back to the NHS itself. For a long time, the NHS has been in competition with itself. In the last 2 years or so, in IT in particular, a collaboration between CIOs has started to happen. This concept of blueprinting everything you do and then giving it freely to the next organisation that needs to go through the route of digitization has become a really big part of where we go.
Mm-hmm. You also talked about I think the clinicians being the most complex customers. Can you just elaborate on that and how you've managed to overcome that or handle them as a customer base or a user base?
We spoke yesterday about the word user, and sort of quipped in some ways there is only one other business in the world that talks about users, and that's the organisation that sells illegal drugs to the users, basically. What we're trying to do is move to a point where we understand clinical need. How do we move away from users and move towards customers? Or even better, how do we move away from users, move towards collaborators for a digital purpose? And I think that's been really key as we've started to redefine what a clinician needs from technology. And the reason we talk about complex user base or complex customers is every clinician is different, not just in who they are, but the role they deliver. I mean, clinicians bring expertise to what they do. Governments across the world, not just in the UK, have tried over the last decade to use IT to make clinical practice conform to a single route. I've pushed back really hard to say that it's not IT's job to conform clinical practice. Clinicians working with IT will come to a best practice that can then be efficient, deliver patient care safely, engage patients, etc. But it shouldn't be an IT solution that conforms clinical practice. That just feels wrong.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the age groups, because I know you've gotten a number of awards and you're a very high social media user and a successful one from what I can gather. In terms of using it with clinicians and clinical peers, are there any differences in terms of adoption or use of the digital technologies, use of social media across the various age groups, or is it?
I think it started to flatten. I think there was. I think that has changed a little bit in recent times. I think in the UK, in the NHS, we see social media specifically very much as a platform, again, for this collaboration point of view. People are using social media to create informal networks to help each other. I think what we've seen is a reach out from the whole of the health system, 1.2 million people in the NHS, to try and find different ways of helping each other. And there are always parts of the organisation that don't want to use social media as a way of creating networks. There has to be multiple different ways of creating those networks of support. But I think more and more that virtual capacity to receive help and give help has become a big part of the pay it forward type culture. I've done something good for a colleague and want to be able to receive something good in return for helping the next colleague. I think that's a big part of that.
That's really good. Now, in this morning's paper that I listened to in your presentation, you were talking about the EHR and how what you've achieved at Leeds, some 300 some odd systems actually form the EHR. And it just sounded almost too good to be true that you've managed to achieve as much and with such I think it was at 1.5% sort of budget. But you talked about the growth in using the mobile EHR and how that's improved the uptake or the compliance and so on. Can you just talk about that particular aspect of it?
Absolutely. I think one of the things to consider is the length of time that the EHR in Leeds has been in development. This wasn't a procurement to hit a date for a big bang go live. Over the last 15 years, the EHR has evolved, grown, and become part of the way of life. So the numbers are up there that are huge now. Every 2.6 seconds, something happens in the EHR 24/7, 365 days of the year. There are, as you said, 310 different systems that make up what we call the electronic health record. I think the way that's been achieved is back to that clinical engagement. We have 3 CCIOs. We have 16 clinical leads from across the clinical units. We have 200 digital champions that are clinicians. All these different parts of clinical engagement come together to make sure that when we're delivering a function, it isn't an IT function, it's a business change function, it's a change for becoming efficient, it's a waste reduction function, it's an ability to engage patients. One of the things I talked about this morning, one of the most amazing days in 20 years working in health tech was to have a patient get in touch on social media and say, my journey in this hospital is vastly improved because of what IT do. I think that is at last that moment when NHS England, NHS Improvement, NHS Digital start to realise that IT is the answer to so many of the issues that face every complex healthcare system in the world today.
Richard, thank you so much. There's a wealth of information that you've shared with us on your visit to New Zealand. And Richard's presentation slides from several, I think, you're doing 2 or 3? Another one, 3 of them all together are going to be on the HiNZ website. So thank you again, Richard, for your time, and thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me.